This video is called "Why Star Wars is Falling Apart." I just seen it already. I thought it was like a really interesting video. I was like, you know what? I'm watching it again on stream because I'm sure Popcorn would like to indulge in this level of debauchery and conversation with Star Wars. We're gonna check it out together. We can.
That lately, some of you have been
Let
a little out of sorts.
me play Witcher after this.
Erratic, unreliable, downright sloppy. Not you, Noir. You've been great.
Oh man, Star Wars is just a complete and utter mess. As a long-time Star Wars fan who in the past 10 or so years has been absolutely obsessed with Star Wars, I have become increasingly unattached to the brand as a whole lately. The original trilogy and the prequels still remain as something to love and go back to when current Star Wars continues to let me down, and yes, I do like the prequels despite their problems.
Now this is pod racing.
So here we are today where Disney's reign over Star Wars is present, and I have never cared less about Star Wars than I do right now, which is a massive stretch to where I was when Disney's era of Star Wars began. Even the brilliance of Andor can't save my disdain for this franchise right now. Andor is a great show. It's slow and it's different, but it's a very good show nonetheless. But there are several reasons as to why Andor being so good has made me even more frustrated with this franchise. Now, I grew up watching the original trilogy, as I think most of us did, and it's sacred, it's great, we all love it. It wasn't
Hey, right now, to be honest with you,
so that
the original trilogy of Star Wars ain't all that. Like, it's good, but it's not as great as the nostalgia for it makes it feel like. Like I would watch Star Wars every single year nowadays. Like, it's not this isn't as long of a tradition as Halo is. Like Halo played Halo every single year for the last 20 years, once a year. Star Wars, I started watching it every single year on May the 4th, like a few years ago. So this is a more recent thing. So I've been like watching, the older stuff more frequently, and is like I just don't care for like a lot of like like A New Hope is still pretty good. The second one is just like then the third one's like watchable, but it's like I don't feel that same thing I feel watching the third original movie as I do watching Revenge of the Sith, which always has me freaking like amped and excited.
I really started to get into Star Wars hardcore, however, with Revenge of the Sith being the catalyst that catapulted my love for Star Wars. So much so, I became a mega fan. I even created YouTube channels surrounding the IP. But now I am just so unmotivated
Reva,
to continue loving Star
Rey,
Wars.
like how you just shows
Don't get
the
me wrong,
two most
I don't
hated women in
hate
Star
everything
Wars.
Disney has done with Star Wars. There's been some good and there's been some bad. I'm not going to sit here for half an hour and bitch about how bad everything has been, because that's just not the case. Sometimes we get a golden nugget in a sea of shit.
Rey Skywalker.
But this video essay is not only arguing why Star Wars is a complete mess and how it got to that point, but it's also a love letter of sorts to a franchise that I used to love completely, but just don't anymore. So I intend to analyze this downfall from the very start, when Georgie Boy signed the papers over to Disney all the way through to right now, today. So this
You want to
is
be
the
honest? You want to know what really like hurt Star Wars? Like, let's just go back to like
Boy signed
this image. That's Bob Iger. Bob Iger did a lot of good things for Disney, a lot of good things for Marvel, a lot of good things for Star Wars. Bob Iger left Disney a few years ago, and it's noticeable that the second he left, things for Disney just went like the guy, the CEO after Bob Iger, just he was like a full corporate guy. Like he didn't give a fuck about people. He didn't care about anything other than kind of like maintaining money, as in he's cheap. So he was like, think of like your typical corporate CEO who doesn't care about the little man. He's not like literally a nice guy, and he's also cheap. So because of that, there's a lot less love put into like the products. The CGI for anything live action got really bad. People stopped doing like on location filming for like live action TV shows, movies. They would just film inside of a warehouse in Atlanta. It was just very low budget. People who do CGI were like overworked, do like a lot of crunch hours. They were cheaping out on directors, cheaping out on like just a lot of stuff because the CEO was cheap. Bob Iger, on the other hand, wasn't cheap at all. Bob Iger believed in spending that extra $1 million to make sure the CGI looks good. He believed in that and taking like an extra freaking few months of a delay if it gets like the CGI department able to like work on the CGI and for it to look good. He was okay with like shooting on location if it needed to be shot on location. Like he was also a person who was kind of like a people guy. Most people who know Bob Iger will tell you like he's a really cool dude. He's a very people person. A lot of people who know him and love working for him. Then he left. And then the guy who replaced him was the opposite of that. And Disney went downhill because the guy who was in charge was not like, who didn't have the same personality. So they fired that guy. Disney board fired that guy and brought back Bob Iger out of retirement. He was tired. He didn't leave because like he hated Disney or he got fired. He was ready to retire. He's like, all right, I'm 50 freaking rich. I got enough money for my great grandkids. I'm retiring. Disney went down a shitter. They fired the CEO guy. They begged Bob Iger to come back. Like he's only going to be on for like 2 years, just kind of like right to ship and find someone who's more like him to be his replacement. So a lot of what happens with Star Wars and Marvels when it comes to like things looking cheap is because the guy who was in charge was cheap.
Papers over to Disney all the way through to right now today. So this is the tragic downfall of Star Wars and why Star Wars has become a complete and utter mess.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
When George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012, it marked a major shift for a relatively dormant franchise. Even though I liked Star Wars before this point, there wasn't really much going on. Not really any games, no films, no shows, nothing. But again, this marked a turning point where Star Wars was going to come back onto the big screen. There was going to be a ton of movies, shows, games, you name it. Star Wars was coming back in a big way. This was where my love for Star Wars reached a high point because the sky was the limit. The hype was building for a new era of Star Wars content. And in my opinion, Disney's Star Wars actually started out really well. We had Star Wars Rebels begin airing in 2014 and it was pretty decent. I still to this
Rebels is hit or miss, but it's really good. Like when it hits, it's really good. When it misses, it's like, all right, just kind of boring, feels like filler. But when it hits, it's always like good when it hits. Like it's never like, that episode was okay. It's kind of like just for those things. It's either you have a really good episode or episode that feels like filler, but it's really, really good. If you're actually a Star Wars fan, you're sitting there going, I don't watch a cartoon. Stop it. You're missing out on the best content because really the cartoons, Clone Wars and Rebels is the best content of Star Wars, like hands down.
This day, I'm not a big fan of the animation style of Rebels, but it's a pretty good show. Then, of course, we found out that Disney would be developing their own trilogy. We had the continuation of the Skywalker saga with Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Not only was this a big deal at the time, but The Force Awakens ended up being, in my opinion, actually a very solid reintroduction to Star Wars on the big screen, because whether we like to believe it or not today, the prequels back in 2015 weren't looked back on as fondly as they are right now. Back then, if you said you liked the prequels in public,
He's right. When I was growing up, I'm 30 years old, and the prequels were coming out when I was in my teens and I was a kid. Even that, like I was like freaking, yeah, definitely like just a kid going like the pre-teenagers. People hated episode 1. People like until the new stuff came out, people said episode 1 was garbage. Like they just hated it. They hated Kid Anakin. I said before, the guy who played Anakin was bullied into depression and he wanted to kill himself and he retired from acting because he was getting bullied so much because of how much people was bullying him. He played Anakin as a kid. He wasn't even Anakin in like 2 and 3. He was just Kid Anakin in episode 1. He had depression from getting bullied. People talking about how bad the movie was. In episode 2, like it wasn't, people weren't as hard on episode 2, but they were hard on Hayden Christensen, who played Anakin. So again, we're repeating the bully Anakin thing to a point. Hayden Christensen was just, he was getting kind of a little depressed. The guy who played Jar Jar Binks was also depressed and he wanted to commit suicide too. And like these things that was like publicly said by the actors, not like made up or anything like that. Like the guy who played Jar Jar Binks wanted to kill himself because of how much he was getting bullied for like Jar Jar's character. Episode 3, usually most people freaking did love episode 3. They still hated Jar Jar, they still hated Hayden Christensen and things like that, but they didn't like the movie itself. So yeah, the prequel trilogy was hated up until recently. Like it's more recent people liking it than it is people hating it.
Like the pitchforks were probably going to come out. But The Force Awakens not only proved Star Wars was back with shattering box office numbers, but it was critically adored and it shook off any bad taste people had with the prequels. Go back through many of your favorite YouTubers' old videos on The Force Awakens in 2015 and the praise for it was sky high. Many of them have the film in their top 5 films of the year. You wouldn't think it looking back at things today, but that was certainly the case back then. The Force Awakens...
I think part of why everyone loved Force Awakens was because of what the potential was for Star Wars at that point. Think of it like having the most amazing cliffhanger for any TV show or video game, and all you can do until the next will come out is just think about what's next. What's the next thing? Like, think about how Marvel is now. Because like Marvel right now, everyone's always predicting like, yo, they're gonna have Silver Surfer in the next movie. They're gonna have Jean Grey. The next one they're gonna have Rogue and Gambit. People just spitballing all these people they think are gonna appear in whatever movie. That was this movie. For this movie, it was like, yo, who is Snoke? Is Snoke freaking Palpatine? Or is Snoke the Darth Plagueis? Like, who is Snoke? Like, everyone's just interested. Like, what race did he come from? Things like that. And you're like, who's Rey? Is Rey related to Obi-Wan Kenobi? Is Rey related to the Skywalkers? Like the people were intrigued by the questions that was left because of this movie. It's like people were like, is Finn a Jedi? Like, there's a lot of curiosity, and when people are curious and they're asking questions, they're also happy. You're getting excited when something that they love is making them wonder and ask questions. They want to see what the next thing is. The downside to that is when you're getting your expectations higher and higher and higher, and you want to see, and you're like, your brain is set on this is what it is. This is who Rey is. This is what happened with Finn. This is what's going to happen with freaking Kylo Ren. This is just what I accept as like my head canon on what the future is. Then it's not that. No matter what movie comes out, whether it's good or bad, it's garbage because it didn't meet the expectations that you set up based on what you felt like was going to be the direction for the next movie.
Was a success in every aspect of the word. Critically done well, it reinvigorated a dormant franchise and it made a shit ton of money in the process. The Force Awakens reintroduced us to Star Wars, something that felt familiar with a unique new generation of characters, a mysterious protagonist on a sand planet, an ace pilot, a defected stormtrooper, and a villain that was genuinely compelling. Was it similar to A New Hope?
Yep.
But that was kind of the point. It was a film made to ease fans back into the biggest franchise in cinematic history 10 years after the last film had came out, that being Revenge of the Sith. Now, the sequel trilogy had some big upsides to it.
That's important, by the way. It's important that this movie followed Revenge of the Sith. You're following a movie that everyone, even if they don't like the movie itself, agrees has the best saber fight in all of Star Wars, be it cartoons, the old movies. Everyone who's a Star Wars fan universally agrees that Revenge of the Sith has the best sword fights in all Star Wars. So you gotta follow that up. You can't fuck up. You have to either get close to that, as good as that, or better than that, and that's just that.
Stands as my favorite character in the sequels, the reason being he was never going to be as good of a villain as Darth Vader. The comparisons would always be drawn between the two. You can't top Darth Vader. We all know it, and Disney knew it too. That's why they made the very crux of his character his failure to live up to Vader, his grandfather. This was probably the smartest thing Disney ever did with this trilogy. Kylo could never live up to Vader, and we as fans knew it, so making the character have that very same dilemma was a brilliant angle for them to pursue. As for Rey, now, I know a lot of people really hate this character, but in the Force
I think Daisy's actually a great actress.
Is actually fine.
I don't think Rey is that bad.
As the trilogy went along because they had no idea what to do with her and how to explain the setup and groundwork they put into the character in The Force Awakens. The same goes for Finn. Finn was one of the more interesting characters in The Force Awakens, a defected stormtrooper running from the fight that gets pulled into the Resistance to help save a friend. It's a great start. Again, same as Rey, it went nowhere. No wonder John Boyega was so pissed off with Disney.
Yeah, man.
So The Force Awakens was a great start. Then a year later, Rogue One came out. Now, I know it's not a part of the trilogy, but this was genuinely a good film. It made $1 billion, it was critically well received, and that Vader scene, oh my god. But The Last Jedi. This was where things started to fall off. This was the film that changed the course of Star Wars.
Ryan fucking Johnson.
Everything you hate about Star Wars right now can be drawn back to the release of this film. Now, some people love The Last Jedi. Other people absolutely loathe its existence. I'm pretty much in the middle on this one. But regardless of
The movie is so bad to me, I don't remember anything about it other than that scene with Snoke gets freaking cut in half.
Decline, and it's never actually recovered.
That and like the little scene with Luke on that little one planet with the walkers and whatnot.
Where all of the mess started. A film that takes the trilogy in a bold new direction, addressing the main flaw people had with The Force Awakens, that being it was too similar to A New Hope. Problem was, these new directions completely abandoned the setup of the film that came before. That's ultimately my issue with The Last Jedi. It makes absolutely no sense in the context of that trilogy. The Canto Bight stuff also was absolutely god-awful, but it had moments of greatness.
The greatest teacher, failure is.
Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
However, The Last Jedi is where the fandom started to absolutely fall apart as well.
Yeah,
This
as
was
a Star Wars fan, the community was fairly decent. Like nerd culture is usually pretty hostile and confrontational, but like Star Wars didn't start getting like really bad when it came to its culture until this movie came out. That is noticeable. Like I don't like, other than like the whole, again, the bullying stuff towards the actor, the Jar Jar Binks actor, and Hayden Christensen and the guy who played Anakin. Like excluding that, generally Star Wars community was kind of positive in my experience. And then right around the time when this movie came out, that's when you started seeing like the vile toxicity started to like rise to the top of Star Wars. And like once a small faction people start doing that, then other people are like, you know what? They're doing it. I'll jump in too and start dogpiling, because they start to feel like if I become this vile human being, it helps me deal with my frustration. That's something that I love, air quotes, is doing terrible. I can cope with my love being garbage if I become just a vile, disgusting, toxic individual.
Wars truly began. And the scary thing is, this is still relevant to this day, despite the fact that The Last Jedi came out 5 years ago. The fandom is still a complete mess because of this film. You can't have a conversation about Star Wars on the internet without it turning into a toxic pissing contest. And that's one of my main reasons as to why I've began distancing myself from the franchise online.
Like, sorry for pausing again so soon, but like I've literally left being part of any community. Like I'm not part of it. Like I'm just a gamer, a nerd, but I've literally like stopped being part of communities on the internet nowadays because they're all just getting so violent, toxic. Like I don't really associate a lot with gamers on the internet because they're discussing Star Wars, sports, comic books. Like I'll like join groups if it's like people who I know they can be like reasonable people. Like it's not about like agreeing, but like if they're respectful and reasonable and just not bad people, then I'm cool with it. But like when it comes to like that bigger shit, I'm just like, nope, not bothering. Even when it like comes to like YouTube, like if I comment something on a YouTube video involving like something that I care about, and people reply to it with a reaction that's like just terrible, I don't even reply. Like I'm not gonna bother to reply. I'm not gonna entertain them and reply. Same thing when it comes to like here on Twitch. I don't reply to people who freaking are being pieces of shit. On Twitter, if I say something on Twitter and someone who don't even freaking follow me freaking like comments like that they disagree, I don't care. I'm not gonna entertain you with a reply. I'm not replying to people who are just being these toxic pieces of shit. Just not doing it.
As I make a video on it, but you get my point. Engaging with people on Twitter about the latest Star Wars show, I just can't be bothered anymore. And it's because of the discourse that this film started, still making its way through the fandom. Now, I know that Solo, a Star Wars story, came out after The Last Jedi, but let's be real, who remembers Solo? But perhaps the thing that I despise the most about Star Wars today is The Rise of Skywalker. This film has aged like milk for me. I cannot stand it. I hate this movie with a burning hot passion. When I first saw The Rise of Skywalker, I don't know what I was smoking, but I actually didn't mind it. But time was not kind to my take on this film, and I eventually woke up from my delusions. The Rise of Skywalker embodies everything that is wrong with Star Wars today. This is the definitive film in highlighting why this franchise is a complete and utter mess. The Rise of Skywalker's goal was to course correct for the people who hated The Last Jedi, but in the process, it also managed to piss off the people it was course correcting for by being a nostalgia bait, lazy.
That's what I said. Like I felt like when it came to like the second movie, it was so bad. I feel like with Rian Johnson. First, you got to talk about Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson has never made a good movie. Like he just hasn't. Like there's just a fact of the matter. All his movies are pretty freaking bad. Like some of them are watchable, but generally Rian Johnson's movies are pretty terrible. So you got this guy who makes terrible freaking movies, who's now making Star Wars, and then he decides to just ignore everything that J.J. Abrams did for the previous movie, because he wants to make it, his movie. So he's doing all these things to change it up because, this is my product, so I got to make it however it benefits me. So he changes all these things up when it comes to like the lore and how things are working. He's probably the one who erased the idea of Finn being a Jedi and making Phasma useless, things like that. But then JJ's like, well, I can't just throw all of that out of the freaking window. Like I can't just, this is the third and last movie. I can't just retcon the entirety of the second movie and go back to what my idea was the first movie. So like he has to like keep some of that stuff, but then he's also freaking trying to like fix some of that stuff a little bit to make it make more sense. And then also at the same time, you got to throw fanfare in because you got to find some way for people to watch it. The last movie was so bad, you got to have a reason for people to even care to watch this, and fanfare always works. So here's a lot of fanfares. You have a reason to come watch this third and final movie.
Conclusion. And it also managed to piss off the people who actually liked The Last Jedi. There were simply no winners with this film. The clear lack of a plan in this trilogy was blatantly obvious, and just recently Lucasfilm have pretty much admitted that they didn't have a plan and have regrets over where this trilogy went. Essentially confirming what we already knew. Bringing back Palpatine was the cheapest move I have ever seen from a franchise of this level. They knew the script was shit. They just tried to fan service their way to $1 billion, and the most annoying thing is, it fucking worked. I feel so bad for the actors of this trilogy. It once started with so much promise, and their characters all got bent over by sheer incompetence. Imagine being Daisy Ridley for a second. You land the role of a lifetime. Things start very well, and then everything goes to shit because the people writing these films and planning these films had absolutely no idea what to do with your character, despite the fact you're the lead. The very role that you've made your own and the defining role of your career ends up being something that you just want to be over. All the press tours that she had to go through of people wondering who Rey's real parents were. It was one of the hottest questions in pop culture at the time, and the actress playing the character had no f***ing idea what the answer was. Are you kidding me, Disney?
That means is essentially every actor in a movie has no idea what the plot of the story is, don't have any idea what's going on with the characters until the day they start filming. Like, when it's the day where they're like, hey, here's your script, and it's like, okay, now I know what the hell I'm doing. Like, it's sad. Like, and also here's the thing about like when it comes to fan theories give studios a cheat sheet on what people like. They're telling you what they want to see. They're telling you what they're into. So if you're seeing all of that, it doesn't hurt you as a company to like take one of those ideas and be like, okay, we like that one, let's go with that one. But I feel like, and this kind of happens with video games too, I feel like sometimes these studios, they don't want to feel like the fans are smarter than they are. So they refuse to go with anything that could lead to the fans being right because they don't have that thought process like, oh, the fans are bullshit enough. This is all ego and pride, and a lot of these freaking directors and screenwriters are like, no, my ego would not allow some jackass on the internet in his mom's basement to freaking tell me what a good story is. Fuck off. This is what it seems like.
It was just a massive shit on the Star Wars franchise. The definition of stumbling your way to a conclusion. The sequels are not looked back on fondly. It's been 3 years since the sequels came to an end, and the general consensus of this trilogy is that it is the worst of the 3 trilogies. And it is the main reason so many fans have turned on Disney. It's the main reason still to this day that Disney still have no idea what they're doing with future projects. It's the main reason we haven't seen Star Wars on the big screen for 3 years and probably won't for at least another 2. The sequels were a mistake, and Star Wars as an IP...
You know, they delayed the High Republic movie. They canceled Rian Johnson's trilogy that they want to have him do.
But The Rise of Skywalker was the rapid plummet straight down, and Star Wars still hasn't recovered from the effects of this trilogy. Star Wars is basically exclusively on Disney Plus these days. We aren't getting Star Wars films on the big screen. Lucasfilm seem to have completely just conceded any prospects of seeing Star Wars return to theaters anytime soon, and they're just milking this Star Wars cash cow to promote their streaming platform. However, it hasn't all been bad. The first of these shows was The Mandalorian. Now, this is where the mess begins to heighten for me, because The Mandalorian was genuinely a great show. This is why Star Wars is a complete mess, because it can't even decide whether or not it actually wants to be good or wants to be bad. It keeps teasing fans and making them hopeful that things are actually going to become great. And that's why it's so frustrating, because they're capable of making things like The Mandalorian, like Andor, but they're also capable of pumping out shit like The Rise of Skywalker and botching shows that are easy layups such as Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But The Mandalorian is ultimately the reason why Star Wars are so focused on shows over films. If The Mandalorian hadn't have been as successful as it was, then shows like Obi-Wan Kenobi probably would have been films on the big screen, which you can't look me in the face.
It's such a cool ass scene.
Obi-Wan Kenobi would not have been better off as a film. One thing that is common amongst many scripts for Disney Plus shows, and this goes for the MCU as well, is that they all seem to be too short to be a show and too long to be a film. That's because these shows were blatantly supposed to be films in the first place, but they underwent rewrites to adapt them into shows, and it's very obvious when you watch virtually anything on Disney Plus that isn't Andor. But regardless, The Mandalorian showed that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are the creative future of Star Wars. These two just get what fans want. The projects they touch seem to be less corporate, with a genuine love for the characters being blatantly obvious. There was just an element of care put into The Mandalorian that made it nothing like the sequel trilogy. There was nuance to the storytelling, payoff for the big questions, likable characters, and a genuine, unique concept for the show being a sci-fi western in the Star Wars universe. Plus, they gave us Baby Yoda. I don't care how much I begin to hate what Star Wars has become, he will forever be adorable.
Grogu.
Shows like the Clone Wars Season 7 come along, and 2/3 of it are just garbage. Like, really, really bad. And then the final third, the Siege of Mandalore arc, is a straight up masterpiece. It's just going from one extreme to the other. And then we have the likes of Star Wars Visions, which in my opinion was bad, but that's...
I don't even think Visions is even canon. Like, Clone Wars and Rebels is canon to like the main storylines. I don't even think Visions is freaking canon.
I suppose, but then we get to the big boy shows, like the Book of Boba Fett. The Book of Boba Fett is, in my opinion, not a good show. It tries so
it's not.
hard to write the
I thought that show sucked.
Mandalorian that it couldn't even let Boba Fett be Boba Fett.
I had to force myself to watch that show.
This was the first major misstep that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have had with the Star Wars.
And it's sad because that show actually got good when it stopped being about Boba Fett and being more about Mandalorian.
In this show, I think the 2 episodes that, don't have Boba Fett in them are genuinely incredible. But all that does is highlight just how poor the show around it was in the first place. The fact you needed Mando to come into your show to make it good essentially says all you need to know. Boba Fett's character...
I said it on Facebook when I was watching the episodes Book of Boba Fett. I was like, this show sucks, but it gets good the second Mandalorian shows up. Like, when a show stops being a Boba Fett show and starts being a Mandalorian show, it got good. And it was so obvious when when episode would end, it didn't play Boba Fett's theme like show song. It played the Mandalorian song. Like, at the end of the episode, it played the same end credit music as the Mandalorian. So it's like, this basically might as well just be episode Mandalorian. It just happens to have the word about Boba Fett freaking thing. It wasn't a good show. Like, everything else about the show was better than like the show itself. Like, Finn is a great character. I love Ming-Na Wen. Her character is great. She's great in the show. She kind of just doesn't have a lot to do, unfortunately. And then, like, when it has Ahsoka and it has Luke, it's all good. but everything else in the show just fucking sucks. And like, yeah, it's cool to see Cad Bane, but you know that Cad Bane's not there because there's like some kind of cool, like legit thing going on here with him and Boba Fett. It's just, hey, look, guys, it's Cad Bane from the freaking cartoon. Aren't you happy?
Sense in this show. He is a complete and utter pushover. No longer was he the cool character that sits back, observes, barely says anything.
But I'll also say this: I've never liked Boba Fett. I've always thought Boba Fett's character was overrated and lame. Like even back into like the older movies, I've always thought Boba Fett as a character was boring and lame. Never gave a fuck about Boba Fett.
You know, the very essence that made the character so popular in the first place. No, he just lets everybody he talks to completely overshadow him. Like, I understand you want to develop the character along and usher in this new take on it, but at least have it make sense with what you literally just established when he showed up in The Mandalorian, which takes place just before this show begins. This, in Mandalorian, was Boba Fett. This Boba Fett just doesn't make any sense. The Boba Fett that murders Bib Fortuna at the end of Mando Season 2 is not the Boba Fett we see at the beginning of this show. Temuera Morrison himself has even expressed his disdain in how this show handled Boba Fett.
Which is bad. It's bad when the actors aren't enjoying the roles that they're playing in. Because they know, like these actors, especially these legacy character actors, they know what people love about those characters. They themselves are just as much as fans of the material and of the concepts as the people who are watching are. So guys like Temuera Morrison, he knows what people like about his character when he goes, because he played Jango Fett in the prequel trilogy. So he knows the people freaking like. He knows, he understands. So he's like, yo, I like this character for this reason too. I understand what the fans are saying, and it's like, you know, this shit sucks, and the actors know it sucks. The actors, as much as people freaking want to believe that actors don't see the tweets, they don't see the memes, they don't see the posts on Facebook and Instagram, they don't see the videos on YouTube or hear Twitch streams. A lot of them do. This stuff does get back to them. Like they'll hear it from like their publicists or PR people. They might just be looking up themselves and hear about it. You know, it happens. So they hear what's going on. Like I watched Sam Witwer on Twitch. Sam Witwer is the voice of Darth Maul in the cartoon. He's also the voice of Darth Maul and Darth Sidious in a lot of the video games. And he talks oftenly about like, you know, him as an actor seeing a lot of this stuff and how he feels when people are attacking all these Star Wars actors and things like that. And people are asking him what do he think about Reva and what he think about the Kenobi TV. They was trying to like attack it, and he's like giving his perspective as an actor on all of it.
Legacy characters like Boba. Legacy characters come back and are just caricatures of themselves. Boba Fett highlights that perfectly. Not to mention the sheer incompetence in basic logic in shows like the Book of Boba Fett. I always remember that scene where he essentially flies the Slave One, or whatever it's called now, Fire Spray, I don't know, man, the Slave One, into the Sarlacc pit for his armor, even though, you know, he escaped the Sarlacc pit and still had his armor on. Like, why are you looking in the... I don't understand. Now, all of this hasn't even touched on the whole cameo issue. Now, if you've seen any of my MCU videos, you know that this isn't just a Star Wars issue. The MCU are doing the exact same thing. Cheap cameos for that nostalgia hit to make you forget how poor the show or film actually is. Star Wars is doing the same thing over and over again. Yes, they did it in Mandalorian Season 2, but to be fair, the cameo of Luke and Ahsoka in that show actually made sense. It fit into the story, it didn't feel shoehorned in, and the show around these cameos was genuinely good in the first place. But with Book of Boba Fett, it was like, shit, this show isn't good. Let's throw in a dash of Ahsoka Tano with a side of Luke Skywalker, a sprinkle of Black Chrysanthemum, and a dollop of Cad Bane and bone apple teeth. This show is good now. And what's worse is there are large portions of Star Wars fans that absolutely eat this.
Yeah, because fanfare works. Is it Star Wars, Marvel, DC, anime? Fanfare works.
Seeing Cad Bane show up, but the problem is this is setting a dangerous precedent for future Star Wars shows, such as Andor. Now let's talk about Andor for a second. I said on this channel a few months ago that this show was essentially a savior of Star Wars because it's actually a well-written story that puts character story, world building above cameoing its way to victory. But a lot of people take issue with Andor because it's boring, it's slow, and this is one of the reasons as to
I'll
why
say this, I said this before, like whenever Popcorn asks if I've seen Andor, and I always say I haven't, I still have not seen Andor. Why? For the same reason that the other people have seen Andor. Not because it's boring, not because it's slow, not because of anything this guy just mentioned. People don't watch Andor because they don't give a fuck. That's really what the reality is. No one cares about casting Andor. A lot of when it comes to Star Wars or any kind of content is people have to care about the character. They have to be invested in some way about that character to want to watch the show or watch the movie. Something has to intrigue them enough to pull them in. No one cares about casting Andor. So they don't care about casting Andor. They're not even getting in through like the barrier of entry of, okay, is it slow pace? Is it boring? Which is true. There are people who don't want to watch like story-driven content. See with Eternals. Eternals isn't even a bad movie, but because it's story-driven, people hate it. There's video games out there that's story-driven. People don't, nah. I like my action. Give me that Michael Bay shit. I want explosions. So that's true. There are people who probably do freaking think that the show is boring or too slow, but for the most part, I think most people don't watch Andor because they just don't care about casting Andor. They're just not interested. The character doesn't interest them. No one cares. Like, I don't care. I'm a Star Wars fan who hasn't seen Andor. Why? Because I just don't care about Andor. I don't care about him. I don't like nothing involving his character is in my brain, makes me feel like I have to watch his show for the continuity of other shows, which you do get that sense with MCU that you have to watch these other shows because of continuity things when it comes to other shows and movies. Same thing comes to like Clone Wars and Rebels. So you watch Clone Wars and Rebels because it has continuity and continuation with the movies. So you watch Bad Batch because of continuity and things like that with Rebels. So like Andor, you don't really feel like, okay, this has like an important place in the Star Wars mythos that I need to like take in and enjoy. Kind of like how the video games. I love the video game Star Wars, but someone who doesn't play video games doesn't have to play Jedi Fallen Order or Jedi Survivor because it's not so massive when it comes to lore and information to where you have to play them to feel like it's connected to like the rest of the universe.
Fact, Andor is a great show. I've become more frustrated with the current state of Star Wars. Andor has not performed well, despite the fact it's one of the best Star Wars shows we've seen, in terms of objective quality when it comes to filmmaking, world building, story, and character. Yet because the cameos aren't pouring in left, right, and center, people just think that it's boring. Now, I will acknowledge that there is naturally less interest in the show because many people just don't know who Andor is, so I expect the show to perform on the lesser side of shows like Obi-Wan. Absolutely. But I remember when the first trailer for Andor dropped, and the first thing I saw on YouTube was, who will appear in Andor? Will Palpatine appear in Andor? Will freaking Max Rebo appear in Andor? Will Salacious B. Crumb be a Sith Lord in Andor? And it just highlighted to me how accustomed people have come to these contrived cameos in Star Wars. It seems like people would rather sit down and play Guess Who with the next cameo than actually get invested in an original story that takes its time. And that is just sad. Andor is not performing well despite the people who have watched it all the way through for the most part praising it as some of the best Star Wars ever. Now, I wouldn't go that far personally. I think it's a great show, but it's not the best thing since Empire or anything like a lot of people are making it out to be. But regardless, Disney don't care if you love this show. They care about its performance. Moral of the story, Andor can be the best show on Disney+, but if it performs terribly, it becomes less likely that we're going to see more shows on this level in future. Instead, Disney are just going to default to the contrived cameo situations of shows like Book of Boba Fett because it puts butts in seats. People love it. I see people say Andor doesn't feel like Star Wars, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. Star Wars recently hasn't been good. This is an entirely new approach. A better approach for more mature storytelling, not a theme park ride of a show with zero substance, but plenty of wow factor. But this is all just Andor. Let's talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is the one that really put me off Star Wars in recent time. And I know this is the show that made a lot of people throw in the towel when it comes to Star Wars because, oh man. Look, Obi-Wan Kenobi is not a terrible show. It has moments of complete brilliance. The problem is you've got to go searching for it behind all of the avoidable rubbish in between. Obi-Wan was the biggest layup for Disney that they have ever had. I mean, you've got two of the most iconic characters in cinematic history leading your show, the return of Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen, who the fans adore, promising a rematch of the century, and it's mid at best. Like, how is that even possible? You promise a rematch of the century, yet put Obi-Wan and Darth Vader in a freaking construction site that looks like it was filmed down the road. Like, where is the spectacle? The final duel's location was slightly better until you realize that it was clearly all filmed on the volume set, which is criminally overused in Star Wars shows except for Andor. Obi-Wan Kenobi from a production standpoint felt cheap. It felt like a high
we say before earlier in this video mentioned that the guy who was in charge of Disney during this show and during like a lot of the recent Marvel stuff is a dude who is cheap. He would not spend money. He would not spend any money for better special effects. He wouldn't spend more money to go like on location and things like that. He was a cheap ass dude. Unlike Bob Iger, who was the CEO before him, who didn't mind throwing money around to freaking have things look better around, you know, the characters and have a better freaking, you know, thing. And like, instead of just shooting high budget stuff in a warehouse, which is why Iger's back now. They fired that dude who was cheap as fuck and begged Iger to come back because they're like, yo, we need someone around here who knows what the fuck they're doing and isn't afraid to freaking spend money, because we understand here at Disney, in order to make money, you gotta spend some money. And this is all just cheap shit.
Like what Andor had. The sets in Obi-Wan felt small, contained, and straight up cheap. This was the show that Disney needed to throw everything at, and it felt like they just gave it enough for it to be completed. If you wanted to keep the budget on this show down, then spend more time with Obi-Wan and his PTSD. Spend more time with Vader by himself in isolation. The fact that we didn't get a scene with Vader in the show by himself, enduring the pain and suffering, reminiscing on Padme, is just a crime. The agony of what Vader goes through behind the scenes, most Star Wars fans would have preferred seeing that than a cheap-looking fan film of a first fight. Not to mention that chase sequence, which, yeah. Deborah Chow really dropped the ball with her direction in this show, let's be honest. Look, Obi-Wan did some stuff right. Seeing Vader dragging people through the street, snapping necks, Vader and Obi-Wan's dialogue in their interactions, and Obi-Wan's PTSD. When the show actually, focused on that stuff for more than 5 seconds before cutting to Reva, things were for the most part good. Reva was just such an annoying character in this show, as she essentially was the character that kept jumping in front of the reasons we were there in the first place. Give us more of Vader suffering in isolation. Give us more of Obi-Wan battling with his demons and how Anakin haunts him. Don't give us Reva jumping over rooftops, because we don't care. Nobody cares. In the finale, when they cutting away from Obi-Wan and Vader to Reva was the most infuriating thing ever. The writers of this show essentially saw the second sister from Jedi Fallen Order and were like,
amazing, I love her.
Character. Let's redo that character in Obi-Wan, but make her less.
You know what's funny?
More intrusive.
With that comparison, that Reva is basically a budget version of Trilla. That reminds me of freaking Mortal Kombat, where I was like, Cole in the Mortal Kombat movie, which is an awful movie, is basically a budget version of Takeda from the video game Mortal Kombat 9. In Mortal Kombat 9 is a character named Takeda. He's the son of Kenshi, and he's basically the pupil of Scorpion. Like, Scorpion basically treats Takeda as if that's his kid. Takeda kind of like just doesn't fuck with Kenshi at all, which is his real father. And like, so everyone at the Shiryu temple, that they all kind of like have like a little bit of jealousy towards Takeda, because like he's getting all this treatment from Scorpion, from Hanzo, where it kind of feels like it's his son. There's another person who named Fox who becomes a bad guy out of that jealousy. That's a different kind of story though. But in the movie Mortal Kombat, Cole is a descendant from Scorpion. He's not a son, but he's a descendant from Scorpion. And it's like everything about him just feels like Takeda, but worse. That's kind of when it comes to like Reva. Reva isn't awful. Her actor isn't awful, but the character is like, there's someone else who exists in this universe who's better than you, who kind of works in the same way, and that's kind of like the comparison to Trilla. Trilla is an amazing, probably one of the best villains in all Star Wars, quite honestly. Unfortunately, they killed her off, because she is just probably honestly, if we're being honest, 100%, Jedi Fallen Order would suck without Trilla. Like there's video games where if you take a boss out, it's not a big deal. Like you take the Nameless King out of Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 3 doesn't fall apart. You know, if you take Radon out of freaking Elden Ring, Elden Ring doesn't fall apart. If you take Trilla out of Jedi Survivor, which I Fallen Order, the game falls apart. She is the overarching big bad of the entire game, and everything kind of revolves around her and her interaction with Cal Kestis. Like literally, like the first person you interact with in terms of like a legitimate fight is with Trilla. And like they're showing her in this badass way when she's dodging freaking bullets and jumping around and doing all these things. It's like, this is amazing. And then you learn about her character throughout the game, and it's like, damn, her backstory is holy shit, but also intriguing. You don't have any of that lore, any of that care with Riva. Like she's just in your face. Like here's this person who's a freaking Inquisitor. That's it. Like there's nothing else to it. It's like there's no care for her backstory. There's no care for like these things, and like there's no secondary character who kind of like amplifies her. Because again, go back to the Jedi Fallen Order, there's Seer. Seer elevates all the lore and exposition that goes with Trilla, because Seer was Trilla's master. They're both Jedis, and Seer was the master, and Trilla got taken by the Empire. So like Seer is amplifying all these things you hear about freaking Trilla, whereas in this TV series, it's like there's just Riva. There's no one who's amplifying her, no one giving you exposition. It's just here, take her. You don't have a reason to take her, but just take her.
On the story, and have her take the place of a character already perfectly poised for that position and kill him despite the fact we know he can't die because of Star Wars Rebels. Oh, and give her 2 fake out deaths as well. That'll go down well. Like honestly, if you actually want to see a good version of the Reva character, go play Jedi Fallen Order, because the second sister is Reva done well. And
she's a goddess.
Anyway,
love her.
The fact that they botched Obi-Wan was just a damn crime against humanity. This show had the pillars in place to be the
Trilla lives in my brain rent free.
By a mile. Yet it ended up being
I'm okay with it.
Best because of decisions that are honestly baffling to me. Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen deserved so much better than what this show offered them. When Hayden
like, you want to understand like how cool Trilla is and how well done that game is. I played that game on stream at our hardest duty level, and it took me like 4 hours to beat Trilla in like the final boss fight, and I wasn't mad at all. I was still loving every second of that boss fight, regardless of the fact that I was getting my ass beat for 4 hours straight. And I beat it, and I was like, that was great. And then replay the game again. I just can't get off of Trilla.
Wants to do something because we weren't following Reva around. He crushed it. The cracked mask scene is excellent. But for me, Obi-Wan was the show that basically solidified to me that Star Wars has just lost its mind. That it's just a complete mess. This is the reason that shows like Tales of the Jedi, something I'd normally be very interested in, I just don't care, even though I know it's good. As for Andor, again, I've enjoyed it, but it's not performing well, so we're probably not going to see more shows like it. It looks like we are genuinely destined for more theme park filmmaking with Star Wars in future. Shows with poor writing, lazy direction, 30-minute episodes with 6-episode seasons.
I mean, that's the fact of the matter of what content is nowadays. Content in 2022, going 2023, people don't want to watch story, and you kind of say this is Marvel's fault, you can say it's DC's fault. People are so hyped up on action TV series, action movies, where they don't want to have anything that's contained. So as much as easy as it is to say this is Lucas's fault, this is DC's fault, this is Disney's fault, it's Marvel's fault, it's whoever's fault, it's the fan base's fault, because you have to watch the content. It all comes down to what we are watching. If we're not watching this show, we can say it's good, but we're not watching it. Why would Disney keep making that show if no one's watching it? Again, I use this example at the beginning of my stream. I was talking to Blue about how Twitch with Amazon it's like the WNBA with the NBA, where it's like they own a property that doesn't make them any money. WNBA doesn't get viewers, so therefore they suffer. But you see all these people, these activists who like pay them more money, but they're not watching the games. If you're not watching the games, they can't make more money. You have to watch the content. Same thing here. You have to watch the content in order for Disney and DC and Marvel and Lucasfilms and whoever to be like, okay, you're watching that. We'll keep making it things like that. That's not what's happening. What happened is people are watching and giving $1 billion to freaking The Last Jedi, and it's like, oh, you want more of that. That's how this happens. It's all based on, at the end of the day, money talks, and what's making them money is where they're listening. And if you're not watching that content that you call good, they're making that content.
Or on cable TV, because the viewership is that low, sets off serious alarm bells over the direction that Star Wars shows are going to go down. And it has me very worried that the downfall of Star Wars is not going to stop. Brings us to right now and the future of Star Wars. The future of Star Wars is the wild, wild west. Let's be honest. We don't know what's going to come out, what's going to be cancelled. Who knows at this point? Like, remember when Patty Jenkins had that really cool promo video come out for Rogue Squadron? Yeah, that lasted long. And I mean, who knows what's going on with Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie? Who knows what's going on with Rian Johnson's trilogy? Like, Star Wars is the very definition of a mess. It seems like Lucasfilm themselves have no idea what is going on with their own shows and films. It's honestly really sad that the only things I'm remotely excited for in terms of upcoming Star Wars content are the shows on Disney+. Mandalorian Season 3 should hopefully be good if it continues what Season 2 of The Mandalorian set up.
Bo-Katan's a terrible leader.
It's just a shame they put the first 2 episodes of Mando Season 3 in Book of Boba Fett. But anyway, The Acolyte, I think, is actually going to be one of those shows that ends up being a complete and utter masterpiece that changes Star Wars forever, or it's going to end up being an absolute joke and just solidifies the downfall. Leslie Headland is, of course, writing that show, so yeah, we'll see how that goes. The fact this show is taking place in the High Republic has me relatively intrigued because it's an entirely new time period on screen. It's something that's actually straying away from the Skywalker saga. This one has a lot of...
They're watching Andor.
And if they...
That's Andor's problem. No one watches it.
This is the kind of show that could really halt that downfall of Star Wars. But we're operating on hopes and dreams here. There is also a Skeleton Crew show, which... whatever. And that Lando show, is that still happening? I don't know. Rangers of the New Republic? I don't know either. I just don't know anymore. Ahsoka is, of course, a major show coming next year. Ahsoka and The Mandalorian are probably the only things I'm genuinely looking forward to with Star Wars going forward, because Mandalorian is a proven
People
show.
are racing.
Rosario Dawson has been great as a
early at night for me racing.
Not to mention, Dave Filoni is going to be taking full control of that show, which fills me with a lot of confidence because Dave Filoni loves Ahsoka. So
Ahsoka's his baby.
The character is going to be treated with respect. Hayden Christensen is also supposed to appear in Ahsoka as well, which makes sense given Ahsoka and Anakin's rich backstory. So much like Mando Season 3, this one is looking promising, but
he is her master, so having a good backstory makes a lot of sense. It'd be kind of weird to have a good backstory for those two people when he's her master.
Star Wars, but at the same time, I'm already bracing for disaster. The past 5 years for Star Wars have been an absolute mess, and I am not entirely confident in where things are going. For as much crap as we give the MCU lately, at least they have a clear direction. Films planned out, ready to go when it's time. Star Wars is just a complete and utter shit show on the future plans for the IP. Nobody knows what's going on. Kathleen Kennedy seemingly doesn't know what's going on. How can an IP this big be expected to run smoothly with so much uncertainty and doubt floating around?
DC or Star Wars is a bigger shit show. DC, because WB's bankrupt.
Late 2025, and that's being optimistic is just sad. I think
when it comes to DC versus Star Wars, when it comes to who's having a worse time, Star Wars is having a worse time because they can't figure out how to get people who watch this movie to watch the other content. Star Wars' biggest issue is the money shows that people want to see the bad content, but the mouths of people on the internet is saying they want to see the good content. People want to see Andor, Mandalorian in terms of what they say on the internet, but the box office says they want to see this shitty movie. So when it comes to DC, though, DC is a bigger shit show because everyone who's a fan of DC knows just how good DC can be. Everyone's a fan of DC who's fan of comic books knows this one particular thing. DC has the best villain catalog in all of comic books, but somehow can't get a good movie. So it's like, that's a bigger shit show because they have too much potential. They have basically the all-stars of comic books and can't get it right. Kathleen Kennedy is who's in charge of Star Wars, essentially.
For Star Wars, Kathleen Kennedy, a lot of people point the finger at her for all of Star Wars' problems, and whilst yes, she has made...
She's to Star Wars what Kevin Feige is to Marvel. What James Gunn now is for DC. That's what Kathleen Kennedy is.
To say she's bad at her job is just not true. She's played a role in creating.
She's not really new. She's been in charge of Lucasfilms since Disney got the property in 2012. So she's not the new George Lucas. She's been there for freaking a decade. But the thing about Kathleen Kennedy, she's kind of a scapegoat. As in, the fans think she's the problem. It's only her and just her. She is the biggest issue with Star Wars. It's like, that's not true. Like, we paused it at the perfect time. These are all the movies that Kathleen Kennedy has been involved with. These are all classic movies. Back to the Future, The Goonies, Fandango, An American Tale, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Great movie. Back to the Future 2, Gremlins 2, Back to the Future 3. Like, just going to like try to get through here as fast as freaking possible, so you can get the freaking the gist. You got freaking Balto, the Flintstones, and over here you got The Color Purple, Money Pit, freaking Hook, the original Jurassic Park movie. You know, like, she's been involved in like a lot of like bangers. Twister, which is getting a sequel apparently nowadays. Been a long time, but it's getting a sequel, and just so on. So she's been involved in like a lot of good stuff. The issue could say with Kathleen Kennedy is like maybe the product of Star Wars has moved on past where she's at. She's not a director. Spielberg's a director. There's a difference between someone who's in charge of things and the director.
History of cinema, for Christ's sake. Some of them are my favorite films of all time. As much as she is to blame,
she's the big
film
boss.
shows that have been awful, she must get credit for the ones that have done well, because the doors.
He didn't do it by himself.
But in general, she just hasn't really been knocking it out of the park, and I think it's time for a change. I think it's time to step aside and let Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau take over.
That's the
Star
ideal
Wars.
thing.
Let them be to Star Wars what Kevin Feige is to Marvel. Star Wars can't keep meandering in mediocrity forever. It's already lost some of the zest that made it the biggest and most iconic franchise in cinematic history. Because that's no longer the case anymore. It's been overtaken. It's been dethroned as top dog, and it is doing nothing to retake that throne. People have made a lot of jokes in recent years that the future of Star Wars is in the past, and to be honest, I'm not really seeing anything that signifies that that is not true. Yeah,
She didn't write the script. She might be the boss, but she's not the one who wrote the script.
To care about it all that much. And I mean, anything.
I say it's easy to blame the person who's the boss, but she's not writing the scripts. She's not the director. She's not the screenwriter.
John Boyega and Daisy Ridley to come back after the shit they went through with their characters. And these in-between stories that we're seeing on Disney Plus aren't really helping the critique of.
You're the only person who thinks that's when it comes to the original cast.
It's time for Star Wars to do something on the big screen that we haven't seen yet.
Most Star Wars fans
Well
is
outside
very,
of
very
Star Wars.
into moving past the original cast.
Republic is a good start, but we've got to be diving into the Old Republic or something very.
Because using the original cast kind of means that you're
soon.
relying on the fanfare of those original characters.
Is a damn perfect place to start. Overall, Star Wars is just in a really frustrating place right now. Fans don't know what the hell is going on. Lucasfilm doesn't know what the hell is going on.
And why bring out the Emperor? Because fanfare.
By the masses, whilst the bad ones
Do whatever you can do to
successful
make fans
in every way
go to the
except
theater
the
to see
ways
it.
that actually matter. So it seems like we're destined.
And it
for
worked. The movie made $1 billion.
Star Wars was in such a promising position 7 years ago, but The Last Jedi undoubtedly sparked the downfall of what was once the biggest IP in cinematic history. Can it recover from its downfall? Can it clean up its own mess? Only time will tell.
We'll see when it comes to Star Wars. It's not that I don't think Star Wars could return to being the upper echelon of movies. At the end of the day, it all goes right back to what fans are watching. You can't say Star Wars needs to be this, needs to be that if you're not even watching the product. Like, if you say this is good and not watching it, why would Disney care? Disney only cares about what's making money. And what makes money is those movies that people think are bad. That's the most watched content. Maybe Kylo should be the protagonist? No. Kylo is at best what he was in the first two movies. Kylo was a great idea. It was an idea that just wasn't executed properly towards the last movie. Kylo was one of the most beloved and like fan favorite characters when it came to the first movie and then the beginning of the second movie. It was like it's like Act 2 of the second movie where people stopped caring about Kylo. Making Rey the Hill wouldn't have done anything for anybody. He wasn't wasted though. Again, people love Kylo. Kylo's a very beloved character right now when it comes to the Star Wars community.